for inviting us here. So I'm one of your presenters. I'm Nima Ravich.
And my name is Kanza Khan.
So the first case fact that we have here is that Engineer A formerly worked for a United States Defense Agency, and he's currently employed by a company known as Supercom as an executive. Engineer A was informed of an uncomfortable practice by a subordinate, which in this case was replacing one of the tests that the DoD wanted with one of the ones that the company had. Engineer A determined that the Supercom's test was just as effective but more efficient in time and in cost. He takes his findings to the board members and he seeks a contract change. And he authorizes that we, instead of putting the DoD test in there, substitute it with the one that Supercom's using. The board decides just to simply continue with the continued testing, but doesn't undergo through the contract change. Engineer A decides not to continue with the inquiry because simply he feels there's no safety and quality issues that are involved with the testing, and he wants to avoid confrontation as he is enjoying his new employment.
So the ethical question, was it ethical for Engineer A to not pursue the matter further? And the references that we made to the IEEE Code of Ethics were Section 2, to avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest whenever possible, and to disclose them to affected parties when they do exist. Section 7, which states that to seek, accept, and offer honest criticism of technical work, to acknowledge and correct errors. And Section 10, which states to support colleagues and coworkers in following this code of ethics.
Some of the statements and assumptions that we made was that documentation is being taken the entire time of this process. So of the testing that's going on, all this would probably have to be accessed by the DoD. The second assumption that we made was, since the military is involved, lives are possibly at risk with the products that are being created in this case. The third assumption we made was that the term public in the IEEE code refers, in our sense, to members of and under the DoD, including military branches, Air Force, etc. The fourth was that the test that the DoD requires is specific to a product of the DoD's line of work. They specifically saying that the test that involved has been gone under several rigorous testing methodologies to ensure that whatever products they have on the field will work according to the conditions on the field.
So discussions and case analysis, we began with Section 2. Engineer A wants to remain in good terms with the company, and so he implicitly supports the interests of the company over the consumer, in this case, the Department of Defense. Engineer A fails to recognize the conflict of interest by avoiding to pursue his inquiry further, and although he initially brings the subject matter to the attention of the board, he later stops pursuing it, which in the sense that is the conflict of interest that he fails to recognize later. And by failing to continue the inquiry, he possibly damages the reputation of the company and possibly the engineers working for the company. If a possible lawsuit were to come about of this, then the engineers involved, lots of publicity isn't always involved in these kinds of big cases, and so, especially ones involving the military. And so the engineers working for these companies would be associated with this company named Supercom, who reached a contract. The other section we referred to is Section A. Engineer A acknowledges the use of different tests and attempts to find the errors in the result, but he does not find the company's method, but instead finds the company's method more efficient. So what happens after this is he doesn't offer criticism to the DoD of their inefficient testing method. Section 7 states that not only do you find these errors, but you also report them to the party that's involved. And by not communicating the company's efficient test to the DoD, he is not fulfilling his duty as an engineer. As engineers, our job is not only to build, but to innovate and improve technology and methods of creating this technology. And so by not reporting this, he is not doing his job.
Section 10, the subordinate under Engineer A comes up to him and expresses concern for the practice that's being done at the company. Engineer A fails to uphold this code of ethics because he simply becomes complacent after the initial negative result he gets from the board. So by not assisting his subordinate's concerns in this case, he doesn't set a good example to his colleagues and coworkers, and more importantly, the employees underneath him, and to take action on their own. and this could cause the employee under him to take action on his own, in this case, whistleblower, which could ruin the company's reputation publicly, and also in the future open it to lawsuits, as well as terminating any further contracts they have with the DoD.
So the conclusion, we concluded that Engineer A was ethically bounded to continue pursuing this matter further. As a member of a contracted agency, he was legally bound to follow the necessary protocol that was designated in that contract that was between Supercom and the DoD. It is Engineer A's duty to ensure that the company upholds this legal document that binds the company to the consumer's desire.
However, by not seeking the correction in the form of a contract change to substitute testing protocols, Engineering A possibly ruins the reputation of the company. It's recommended that the Engineering A continues to pursue the issue with the board. It's his job as an employee to persuade the board to take a course of action that is beneficial to them, even if there's short-term cuts in costs and time. If this fails, Engineer A should possibly seek resignation to uphold the code of ethics and to ensure his reputation as an engineer. And this also expresses his disapproval with the board's decision. If Supercom does fire him, however, if he continues to pursue this inquiry, Engineer A has the right to pursue litigation against Supercom due to his wrongful termination. Thank you.
So I take it your silence means we get to have you now.
Yep.
Yes.
You have 5
Okay.
minutes to ask questions.
You made reference to the board. Whose board?
Supercom board,
Supercom's board? What kind of board?
the board of executives.
And these are employees as well?
Yes, they are.
These are not other, I want to say officers?
No, these are members of Supercom.
These
They
are all
employed
employees.
by Supercom, and they are the executives who make decisions for Supercom.
But they report to a board. I mean, there's still a board of directors. Or is this the most senior part of the company?
This is the most senior part of the company.
This is the end of the food chain.
This is the end of the food chain. the
Okay.
highest.
It was also stated that Engineer A himself is also an executive within Supercom.
So what else could this executive do once he presented the case to the board and they summarily dismissed him? What else could he have done?
He could have gotten the support of his subordinate who was also interested in pursuing this. Another thing he could have done was just rally individually the members of the executive board, persuade them one-on-one. You don't need the approval of the entire board, I'm assuming, because as long as you have a majority vote, it should approve. of
Most
whatever
corporations are totalitarians. There's no rule of thumb that you can follow.
change. Oh, okay.
And trying to get people to rally behind you is career limiting to these individuals. So when you go out on this, you need to have your facts and ducks in a row. There were several items in there that caused me concern. Why didn't he pursue?
Why did he pursue?
Why didn't he pursue once they told him no?
Well, he was concerned about his career. He was new to the company, and so he was concerned about the career. And he was also, he made the wrongful assumption, which wasn't his call to make, that not reporting these tests was safe and wasn't going to harm anyone or reduce the quality of the product being produced.
When you change or substitute a test in a contract, a lot of things happen. One of the things that does happen is you put other people in jeopardy. So by substituting something, if the spec calls out the test specifically in accordance with MIL 882, and you substitute a lesser test, and you come to a conclusion that it's okay, and now you've reduced the requirement, okay, that in itself is catastrophic. So why would an engineer that knows better do that? What are the options to accepting a lesser test?
When he initially did the tests, he found out that it was also the same. But the two things that were significant to his company, and that's the conflict of interest that came in, was that he found out that the new test that the company was doing was significantly shorter in time and also cost less. And both of these things are extremely beneficial to the company. But as an engineer and as an employee for a customer, in this case the DoD, he was under obligations not only to tell his board members that they needed to do this change, to notify the DoD that they were doing a different test. That's not the same one that was under contract. He needed to and was enforced to ensure that they were notified by this, at least some form of communication.
No, there are other methods to do it. Can you think of any?
Well, he could have possibly anonymously vetted. There's been cases, for example, with the F-22 Raptor, where people have come out and said that some of the procedures in that program are not going very well. He could have done it that way. Unfortunately, with that case, it opens the possibility of ruining the company's reputation and also bring a lot of scrutiny to it. But in the case of the engineer, he has to take it upon himself that if this endangers lives, he needs to put not his interest and the company's interest, but the welfare of the others that rely on the equipment and the product that are being produced by his company.
So rather than taking steps just outside the company, you know, accountability offices and whistleblower type organizations, do you think there's any steps that he could have taken inside his company rather than just to stay the current course? Would there be anything he could have done internally?
Well, it's a possibility that if he couldn't get the board of directors behind him, other than the other two options.
These were not the board of directors though, right?
No, these are the board of directors. This is the top of the line, the gentleman that he was speaking to.
It says that in the case, that he was talking to the board of
He was
directors?
talking to the board. All of us notified in London City.
Yeah, I think he's talking about executive management.
Right.
They report, in most companies, they report to the board of directors. The board of directors are elected by the shareholders.
Then he should go
So-
directly to the board of
Yeah.
directors
Yeah,
rather
so
than
you
using.
gotta distinguish between, when you say board of directors, that's usually different than officers of the company or employees of the company. The board is elected by shareholders, and those are the folks that the executives work for. But is
That's
there
why
any-
I was crossed.
Is there any other internal, I mean, usually companies have ethics departments, internal
HR.
governance, legal departments. Do you see any other course that he could have done internally first, as a first step?
Most likely when he went to the board, they just took his advice.
He didn't go to the board.
Sorry, he went to the officers. When
No,
he went to
yeah, he went to executive management.
the executive manager, when he first went to them, they probably just assumed as an engineer, he told them, they took his advice as an engineer, which was that this is similar, but it's shorter and it saves money. So they simply took it in that sense. What he could have done was probably brought in the legal department and tell from their point of view, saying that you can't do this because you guys are legally contracted.
Right.
If a lawyer comes up to you and tells you he has more sway talking about it on a legal document than for, say, an engineer, even if the engineer is correct about it.
Right.
So he had an option of bringing somebody else with more expertise in that.
So earlier when you said that he exhausted all of his ways, now you're telling me there's another one. And now you thought of one. Okay, so let's think some more. What other options would they have?
He could also possibly, if there's an ethics board in the company, he could also go to that.
Okay, you're talking about an ombudsman or an ethics organization where you can go and report to them, whatever the case may be. So you're looking at that organization. What other organizations would there be?
There probably is outside organizations that are able to accept employees that come in with concerns if they feel that they've negated any other options, which was being the legal route, talking to the ethics
What I'm
department.
driving to is the primary step that you missed completely. I'm trying to get you to think. We all work for someone.
Mhm.
What do you do when something's wrong?
You talk to the boss,
Okay, and then you talk to whose boss?
the shareholder.
The boss's boss.
Boss's
And you
boss, yeah.
continue to go up the food chain. But there is a position where the buck stops. Okay, and I'm trying to get you to think about that. As an engineer,
Mhm.
think, both of you, where is the ultimate authority in engineering? The chief engineer is responsible for the technology of the product.
Mhm.
There's a chief systems engineer that's responsible for the verification and the validation of the product. Those two, yin and yang,
Mhm.
without their signatures, the product doesn't go forward. You violated everything that's holy by substituting the test. Whenever that happens, you go to those individuals before you go to the board. The board will never understand. The board kills messengers, remember that. You go to your chief engineer, your chief systems engineer, let them fight the fight, they carry the weight.
I have a question for you. If you go to your auto mechanic guy, he tells you, I need to put new rings in your car because the friction is too high, and you pay him $3,000 to do that because he did a test. You give him the money, and then you go to pick up your car, and you ask him, what did I do? And he says, oh, I put better oil in your car. How'd you feel about that?
Quite angry.
Why?
Feel cheated.
Why? Cheating.
The reason
So, he told you that he would do something for you. You paid him to do that, and he did something different. And he didn't report it to you because you didn't ask. Do you think that in this case, that these employees had an ethical obligation to inform the government that they used oil on their product? Because I didn't do the full test, I did a different test.
Yes, they had an ethical obligation to report that, and our case was under the assumption that there are reports of these tests that are being done that are being sent to the DOD, and so, based on this assumption, they're either falsifying information or they're not, either they're falsifying it or someone in the DOD itself is overlooking this information that these proper tests are not being performed.
So I noticed that you did include that you assume test results are provided to the government. What you didn't assume is what the test procedures are that are provided to the government.
Right,
Right? That wasn't clear.
right.
But even so, it states pretty clearly that they were not following the procedures that was outlined in the contract. And one of the things about ethics is you need to notify the parties that are invested.
Right.
I didn't see that on your list of items.
I believe we referred to that in
There
section
was-
2.
Yeah, you had, the reason was, under section 2, there's a conflict of interest. The reason why he was unethical in this case was that he should have gone to the government. He should have found a means of telling them to change the contract. At least notify the government that there has been a different test. But under 2, it states explicitly, to my understanding, that if there's a conflict of interest, you need to seek the other parties' approval and notification of it. And he didn't do that, as you noted. He didn't notify them that they did a total different test on the product that the DOD wants to be made. So in that case, he was unethical on continuing to ensure either the DOD knows about it or the officers tell the board that they're going to change the contract.
In the code, part 3 is about being honest and realistic and stating claims or estimates based on available data. So you could very well have an engineer that's determined that a lesser test, a test with less scope, would achieve the same requirements. You could have that situation. In fact, that happens because we want to save money. But if you bid something different, if you've got something else in your contract that says, I'm going to do this, but instead you do something else, there's an honesty problem there. You might be getting paid for new rings, and all you're doing is changing the oil, kind of thing. So I noticed that clause wasn't included in your assessment of the code violations, and I wondered what's your thinking along the lines of their honesty in the estimates of this cost and the statement of work that they agreed to?
You were wondering what our thoughts were on that?
Yeah, just, you chose, I think, number 2, which was right on, I thought, you talked about helping others uphold the code, and you talked about you talked about one more.
Section 7.
7, yes. I just wondered what your thoughts were about excluding number 3.
Well, we definitely feel that this data should have been reported because it is in the interest of both parties that not only is Supercom going to save money and time with this more efficient method, but the government will also receive whatever product it is that Supercom is making at a faster rate, or just receive more of it produced in the span of time that they're producing currently, or they were producing with previous method. So because it's in the interests of both parties that this be done, it is essential that the engineers or the company Supercom report this to the government.
Okay, so we don't have any time for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you.